welcome. You're listening with us here on the Signs of Final Days channel.
Where we look into, well, significant events happening around the world.
Right, and we try to connect them sometimes to ancient wisdom, looking for the signs.
Exactly. And today, we're focusing on something quite recent that really captured everyone's attention.
That would be the Titan submersible incident, a real tragedy.
It was, but what's interesting and what we want to explore is how the descriptions of the deep ocean environment that came out because of this, how they seem to line up really quite remarkably with details found in a very ancient religious text.
Okay, so we'll be looking at the Titan story, what happened there, but also what the experts, the marine scientists say about those ocean depths.
Precisely. We'll hear their descriptions, the science bit, if you like, and then we'll compare that directly to a specific verse from the Quran.
And the goal here is
to understand the facts of the Titan's end, grasp what science tells us about that extreme environment, and then, look at this surprising parallel with the ancient verse and just think about what insights might come from that.
Okay, let's start with the Titan itself. Ocean Gate Expeditions. They were the company, right?
That's the one. They started paying passengers down to see the Titanic wreck back in 2021.
And the Titanic wreck is deep. Really deep.
Oh, incredibly so. About 3,800 meters down. That's, around 12,500 feet?
It's hard to even visualize. Like you said, deeper than Everest is tall if you flipped it over.
Pretty much, yeah. An immense depth. And the Titan was their vessel for these trips.
So this wasn't the first trip.
No, they'd done dives before. The Titanic wreck was rediscovered way back in '85, and Ocean Gate started these expeditions more recently.
Right, and then came June 18th last year.
Yes. 5 people boarded the Titan. Among them were Shahzada Dawood, a prominent Pakistani businessman, and his son, Suleiman.
And then, contact was lost. The world was watching this unfold, hoping for the best.
Yeah, it was tense. Communication stopped about, an hour and 45 minutes into the dive.
And the investigation later suggested what?
Based on acoustic data and analysis, the prevailing theory is that the submersible imploded, likely around the time they lost contact.
Imploded?
Yeah.
Due to the pressure, presumably.
Almost certainly. And this would have happened deep within what oceanographers call the bathypelagic zone.
The midnight zone.
That's another name for it, yeah, because sunlight just doesn't reach there at all. This zone starts around 1,000 meters down, goes to about 4,000.
And the Titan was likely somewhere in that range.
Probably around 3,000 meters, maybe a bit more when the event occurred. Still above the Titanic wreck itself.
And the search mission sadly confirmed the loss. They found debris.
They did. Parts of the Titan, the tail cone, bits of the pressure hull were located on the seabed.
How far from the Titanic?
About 1,600 feet, so roughly 500 meters away, scattered.
But the passengers, they weren't recovered.
No, and based on all the accounts, recovery from that depth under those conditions, it's just not feasible with current technology.
Which brings us to the environment itself. Why is it so challenging down there? What makes it so hostile, not just for recovery, but for anything to exist?
That's really the core of it. And, one sort of side effect of the intense media coverage was that a lot of experts, marine biologists, oceanographers came forward.
To explain the conditions.
Exactly, to help people understand what it's actually like thousands of meters down.
So beyond the obvious, like the crushing pressure,
Yeah.
what did they highlight? What are the key features of that environment?
Well, the pressure is definitely number one. It's astronomical, hundreds of times surface pressure. But beyond that, something that might surprise people came up frequently.
Oh, what's that?
These experts talked about waves, but not surface waves.
Not like at the beach. How can there be waves deep down?
They're called internal waves. See, the ocean isn't uniform. You get layers of water with different temperatures, different salinity, different densities.
Okay, like invisible layers.
Sort of, yeah. And waves can actually form between these layers. So you can have waves propagating deep inside the ocean, one layer moving against another.
Wow, so internal waves layered on top of each other, miles down.
Precisely. Scientists describe them as moving boundaries within the water column itself. It's not just still water down there.
That's fascinating. Okay, so internal waves. What else?
Well, these internal dynamics, combined with the sheer depth, contribute to another defining characteristic, the darkness.
Right, the midnight zone. How dark are we talking? What terms did the experts use?
They were pretty consistent and vivid. Terms like pitch darkness, absolute blackness, zero visibility kept coming up.
Zero visibility.
Yeah. They explained that once you descend past the upper layers, maybe after an hour or two, like the Titan was doing, any trace of sunlight is just gone, completely absorbed.
So it's like being inside. well, inside something completely black.
Metaphorically, some descriptions used phrases like being covered by dense, dark clouds, not literal clouds, obviously, but trying to convey that total lack of light, that visual obscurity.
Pitch darkness. I mean, how absolute is that?
Well, this is the detail that really stuck with me from the expert accounts. They often used a very specific illustration.
What was that?
They'd say the darkness is so profound, so complete, that if you were somehow down there and held your hand right up in front of your face,
Yes.
you would barely be able to see it, maybe not see it at all.
Can't even see your own hand. That's difficult to comprehend.
It really underscores how alien and isolated that deep sea environment is. Total sensory deprivation, visually speaking.
Okay, let's just pull that together. What modern science and observation, highlighted by the Titan event, tells us about these depths is crushing pressure, yes, but also these unexpected internal layered waves and this profound, absolute pitch darkness where you effectively have zero visibility, can't even see your own hand.
That's a fair summary of the scientific picture, based on modern exploration using submersibles, sonar, all that technology.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
here's where we bring in the other piece. You mentioned an ancient religious text.
Yes, we need to look at a specific verse in the Quran. It's in Surah An-Nur, which means the light, verse 40.
Surah An-Nur, verse 40. What does it say?
Okay, so the English translation goes something like this. Or like, darknesses in a deep sea, covered by waves upon waves, topped by dark clouds.
Okay, darkness is in a deep sea, waves upon waves.
And it continues, darkness upon darkness. If one stretches out their hand, they can hardly see it.
Hang on, read that last part again.
If one stretches out their hand, they can hardly see it.
Wow, okay. Let's put that right next to the scientific description we just discussed.
The parallels are, well, they're quite striking, aren't they? The verse talks about a deep sea specific reference there.
Yep.
Then it mentions being covered by waves upon waves, which sounds remarkably like the description of internal layered waves from the oceanographers.
It really does. Waves upon waves. And the darkness.
The verse says darknesses plural upon darkness, which again seems to echo that idea of layers contributing to the profound obscurity. Not just dark, but layered darkness.
And then that incredibly specific detail.
If one stretches out their hand, they can hardly see it. That is almost verbatim the illustration used by modern experts to convey the intensity of the pitch blackness down there.
It's uncanny. So, modern science, using 21st century tech, describes the deep ocean near the Titanic wreck. Layered internal waves, pitch darkness so black you can't see your hand.
Correct.
And a verse from the Quran revealed over 1400 years ago describes a deep sea with waves upon waves and darkness upon darkness, where you stretch out your hand and can hardly see it.
That's the comparison side by side. And you have to remember the context of when this verse was revealed around the 7th century AD.
What was known about the deep ocean back then?
Pretty much nothing in terms of direct observation of the depths. Human interaction with the sea was surface level, maybe some shallow diving for pearls or sponges, a few meters perhaps.
No submersibles, no sonar.
Absolutely none of the technology needed to even reach those depths, let alone survive the pressure or observe things like internal waves or quantify the darkness.
So the details in the verse layered waves, the specific level of darkness described by the hand test, these weren't things people could have observed back then.
Not by any known means, no. Which leads to the central question that sources discussing this often raise.
Which is, how? How could these very specific, scientifically accurate details about an environment totally inaccessible at the time end up in this ancient text?
Exactly. How was this known? And the materials we're drawing from, they don't necessarily offer a simple how-to explanation. Instead, they frame the correspondence itself as significant.
Significant how? What's the takeaway?
Well, one perspective is that maybe events like the Titan tragedy, as awful as they are, serve an unintended purpose.
What is?
They thrust these obscure scientific realities, the internal waves, the absolute darkness into the public spotlight. People hear these descriptions from modern experts, and then perhaps some might encounter this ancient verse or be reminded of it and suddenly see these incredibly precise parallels that makes them stop and think.
So, the idea is that a modern event can illuminate or draw attention to knowledge embedded in an ancient text, knowledge that maybe wasn't fully appreciable until science caught up.
That seems to be the suggestion. It encourages a closer look at the text, prompting questions about its origin and the nature of the knowledge it contains. It challenges our assumptions about what could have been known back then.
It's definitely a powerful point for reflection. You have modern tech confirming these very specific details.
Layered waves, hand-obscuring darkness.
And then you find those same details laid out in a text from over a millennium ago.
And the verse doesn't just stop with the physical description. It concludes with a line that adds another deeper layer of meaning.
What's the final line?
It ends. And he to whom Allah does not grant light for him, there is no light.
And he to whom Allah does not grant light for him, there is no light. Okay, connecting that back to the darkness and the deep sea. What's the interpretation there?
According to the sources discussing this, it draws a powerful analogy. Just like the deep sea is plunged into absolute physical darkness, utterly dependent on an external source for any illumination.
Right.
The verse suggests that similarly, true understanding, guidance, spiritual insight, light, in that broader sense, is also something that must be granted specifically by God, by Allah, in the Islamic context.
So the literal physical darkness becomes a metaphor.
A metaphor for a spiritual or intellectual darkness, yes. The darkness of a heart or mind that hasn't received divine guidance. It connects the physical description, now validated by science, to a profound spiritual point.
That does add significant depth. It's not just, here's a description, but it's using that accurate description to make a point about guidance and understanding.
And it leaves you, the listener, with a lot to think about. Not just the physical mysteries of our world, like the deep ocean, but also about knowledge itself. Where does it come from? How could these details have been known?
And what did that final line imply about seeking truth, seeking light?
Exactly. It's a prompt for contemplation on multiple levels.
Well, this has certainly been a thought-provoking connection to explore, arising from the sad events surrounding the Titan. Comparing the scientific picture of the deep sea with this striking verse from Surah An-Nur.
It really highlights how contemporary events can sometimes circle back and cast new light, so to speak, on ancient texts and the knowledge they might hold.
And asking these kinds of questions, looking for connections between current events, science, and ancient wisdom, is really what we aim to do here on the Signs of Final Days channel.
It is indeed.
We genuinely hope this discussion has offered you some valuable food for thought. If you found this exploration meaningful, please do give it a like.
And maybe share it with others who you think might find this comparison interesting, or who enjoy pondering these kinds of questions.
And of course, please subscribe to the Signs of Final Days channel. We'll continue to examine events and texts, looking for those deeper meanings and potential signs in the world around us.
Thank you for tuning in and engaging with us today.